at some point, your loved ones are going to die. And do you want to sit there a year later, 2 years later, 2 days later and say, if only I had had either more compassion, more dedication? No, you want to say, I stepped up to the plate.
Welcome to the Up Your Average podcast, where Keith and Doug give no-nonsense advice to level up your life. So buckle up and listen closely to Up Your Average.
Good morning, Doug.
Hey, good morning, Keith.
It is such a great day to be alive. It's a great day to start 2026 with a bang. And we have my friend, Dr. George Elmes, with us today. I'm so excited.
Good morning.
Yeah. George and I go way back. We did a Bible study in Gimbel's First World headquarters over on 98th and Keystone in the late 90s. That was a long time ago, but that was good. And he was affectionately in the day. I don't know if you're known as Dr. Rebel anymore, but there was a time.
Yeah.
Dr. Rebel?
Dr. Rebel.
You can see why I like George, right?
How did that come about?
Well, it probably came mostly from administrators who weren't happy with me objecting to the way things were sometimes being run. And I was not afraid to let people know.
Yeah.
So
I think
That's a pretty good nickname.
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
the event that I remember you telling me about was I don't even know if Caleb would know what it was, but they had time cards that I assume would be like this, right? They're this size. And,
Oh, yeah.
and they wanted George to clock in and out every day is what I remember. And his response to it was just what brought a smile to my face.
So basically, when I worked, my work didn't start when I went to the office. It started when the last day ended and the next day began. So when I filled out a time card, it was 24 hours.
Right.
Every day.
Yeah. We had the opportunity to befriend George's mom, and she just bragged and bragged and bragged about George. But I think if you wanted a doctor, George is the guy you would have wanted, because she would just tell me, I can't believe that he goes to the funerals and goes to visitations and goes and cares so much. I'm like, I'm sure that is a historical kind of idea that probably doesn't happen much anymore.
Well, and I always used to tell patients and patient families that when you know somebody for 10, 20, 30 years, the relationship becomes more of a friend, almost a relative. But I'm also humbled because I recall that when I would go to a viewing or a funeral home, I was always surprised that I would, even though I might have known somebody for 30 years, I always learned something about them, about their lives that I didn't know before. You'd walk in and there'd be all these bowling trophies on the wall, or there'd be a picture of a patient wheelbarrowing his wife down the road, things that you just never would have found out. So humbling.
That's one of the joys of what we get to do, George, is like that we find, because I would say our average client's probably 25 years right now that we've been working with them,
Yeah.
and we get to know the family. And part of what we go through is kind of the idea of our conversation today. And I titled it, I'll share our screen with our friends today. I titled it, What to Do When the Options Aren't Great. And this idea is a medical idea, is where I'm zeroing. And there's a lot of those kind of ideas where you can think that way. But in my own experience, this kicked off for me probably in 2009. My mom was diabetic, and somehow I caught wind that she did a hit and run at a high school football game. Like, she ran into somebody's car and drove home. And my thought was, boy, if only there was something I could do about that. I wish I could have helped him. Who does something about that was what I started wondering. I'm like, oh, nobody's going to do anything until somebody does something. Yeah. And at that point, it seemed clear to me that neither of my siblings were going to do anything. And so I'm like, here we go. And so as we kind of a big part of this podcast, Up Your Average, is you are the average of the 4 or 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think clearly what Doug and I want for our friends that watch is that they live their best life. And when I was thinking about this, I was just thinking of this quote that's attributed to Mark Twain, but I'm not sure if he actually said it. Is most men die at 27. We just bury them at age 72. And that process is people get really anxious towards the end of the story, but they let a lot of time between 27 and 72 where they're not living. And so we try to get them to live that time. But kind of today, what I want to talk about is once we get to that time, I found this chart, and it was saying, and it was kind of showing what I was trying to find was the evolution of a body. Like you get strength, and at some point you lose strength and you tail off. And this chart was showing the difference between 1950 and 2015, where people live, and then at 77 it started tailing off pretty dramatically. And in 2015, it showed that at age 87 that it starts to tail off. And I think as a bell curve, this idea people don't like to talk about, because when it starts to go off the rails, it seems like it can go really quickly. So as like helping a lot of families, and you've known these people for a number of years, mm-hmm. Then if they do annual physicals, were you able to recognize it between one year and the next, or how would you even recognize it?
I would say the majority of the time, it's because loved ones notice a change. Because men and women, when they get to be that age, they have this stubbornness that is, buried into them, and they're not going to acknowledge that there's any weakness or failure. And typically, a wife or a child would point out to them, "Hey, did you know that, mom left the car running when she went into the house, or the garage door has been open all night?" Those kinds of subtle things. The affected person is probably either not going to recognize that or not going to admit that there's an issue or a problem with their decline.
And so would the children tell the parents to say something to you, or would the children somehow send some kind of smoke signal to you? How would you get wind of the problem?
Typically, they would ask us if there was something that we could do, some tests that we could do, or some suggestions about how we could maybe bring that up.
The children would?
Children. Or a spouse.
Yeah, I was going to say, because a lot of times with the HIPAA, that would kind of limit some of that communication.
It certainly does.
Yeah. And one of the things that, and we highly recommend that you all have healthcare power of attorneys, and you include multiple levels, not just the spouse, but in case the spouse isn't capable, that you include who you want to be that person, because that's how you, like it, as the child, you need access to this to be able to figure out what's going on.
Well, and you use the word healthcare, and that's important because people think that once you've established power of attorney, that's going to take care of things, but that's purely a financial decision-making process, and you need to extend beyond that.
And with my mom, so I'm going back probably 20 years now. With my mom's, probably hers had dad, and then somehow I must have been on there. I don't know, but I didn't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. Right? Like I noticed mom would repeat things, right? And then this whole hit and run situation, I went to the next level. I'm like, well, how do you? Well, she probably shouldn't be driving if she did hit and run. So who takes the car away, right? Like, and so I thought, well, I'll just go do this. I'll go take one for the team. And so I drove down to Evansville and drove my mom to where I'd had an accident one day, and we were sitting there, and I was pointing out that I could have really hurt somebody, and you had this hit and run, and man, she got angry. She was really angry with me. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to call my siblings and I'll tell them what I did. Like I'll be the bad guy. And so I told them. And then the next day, I thought, she's going to talk to me forever. And the next day, we talked, how's everything going, Keith? I'm like, oh, we have a bigger problem than driving. And so that's when it became more apparent to me that we had something. So then I called her doctor's office and sent them her healthcare power of attorney and asked them to send me her records the last decade so I could just read through. And they had told her probably 5 years earlier that she had dementia. Mm-hmm. And I guess she was too embarrassed to even tell. Like, we didn't know until I read that document. And so I guess that's what happened. I don't know. Is that a normal thing?
That's a normal thing.
So what if you tell somebody that, they're not telling anybody?
Right. Well, they don't want to, either they don't want to admit it or they don't want to acknowledge it. The testing must be incorrect or it really doesn't reflect where I am.
I'd want to cheer you all on with your family if you're having those kind of conversations, that you don't do that you communicate, because the loved ones don't know what's going on. If they don't know and they're trying to figure it out, and if a doctor has told you something, you need to make that known. As difficult as much as you don't want to do it, to have that conversation is going to help everybody, I think. I mean, it's sad. I put that chart, that bell curve there, because the slope, once you peak out, drops off like a cliff, and you don't. Most likely, it's not going to give you plenty of time to have these conversations. It's probably going to begin to drop pretty dramatically. And once it gets really bad, my experience is the emotions are involved too much that nobody wants to talk about the elephant in the room.
Correct. Well, and typically I would start the discussion telling people that there are 3 phases that you go through. You can lose money, and people are going to recover or get over that pretty easily. You can lose loved ones, and that's going to have a little bit more of an impact. But as soon as you start taking away independence, that is the thing that these people tend to grab onto and hold tightest, is the independence factor. And driving is a very big one. You take away car keys, they'll get new car keys. You take away the battery, they'll call AAA, and AAA will be out there in 24 hours and put a new battery in the car, and they're off and driving again. And sometimes it takes, just for example, driving, there are institutions with occupational therapists that provide a service that says, come on, for a fee, we'll bring your loved one or your spouse or whoever in, and we'll go through a driving test, and we'll be able to tell them whether or not it's safe for them to drive. And so that's one of the leverage pieces you might have. You say, well, if you can pass this, then I feel that we're better off knowing that. But if you can't, then you need to be able to give up that part of your life. But you also have to be able to provide some type of alternative means of transportation at that point.
Boy, that one is that's a hard one. I'd say, like, if you're the kid or the loved one, a way, and they're living independently, is probably whenever you visit to do a walk around their car and just notice the car, to see that will give you some foreshadowing what's going on, because there's going to be dents and nicks, or maybe who knows what's going to be on there. But I always smile when I think about my grandma, and she drove one of those big old Cadillac. I don't know what it would have been. It was a ship size one, and it was gold color back in probably the 70s kind of one. And that thing had dents everywhere because it's trying to, like, move an aircraft carrier around town.
George, how would you encourage Gen 2 as they're observing some of these changes in their parents, or how did you do it, or how would you want to be treated?
Well, it's a very challenging question. Thinking back to my own parents, it became pretty obvious, but we went through the same phases where denial was a big part of it. And so uh, we had to establish who was in charge. Uh, and then because I have 5 brothers and sisters, so and because I was the doctor, uh, I had my name was on that piece of paper saying yes, I had healthcare power of attorney. So then it fell back to me, and then you had to sit down and, as Keith pointed out, you have to you had to get some type of proof that there is an issue. And so I think starting with a dementia screen is probably the best way to do that.
That is, man. I think we're going to have a podcast in the weeks ahead about the Dale Carnegie course, and communication skills are probably at the lowest they've been in my lifetime as a culture. And we're talking about hardcore communication with this thing, because you have emotions, different opinions, different personalities. And as the healthcare power of attorney, I was kind of a steamroller. I didn't necessarily try to get consensus because I didn't know that was going to do any, like it was going to probably create more emotions. And I took the attitude with my siblings that out of sight, out of mind. And for me, that worked. I was just able to take care of mom independently, just getting other advice on what to do in different situations. Because probably she moved in with us in 2010, died in 2014. And so probably 2009 was when I started getting more. That's probably when I went and had the conversation with her about her car. And when I think about it, like with you said 5 siblings, trying to talk through every decision and get consensus would seem like that would create a lot of challenge depending on the personality types.
And it's going to vary from family to family. I suspect, though, in most families, the response is going to be, I'm so glad somebody else is going to take care of this. I live a time zone away and I don't have the inclination to do it. Here, you handle everything. But it's not that way all the time.
Right.
How would you advise Gen 2 to cheer on Gen 1's independence?
I'm not sure I have a great answer for that. I think, again, you want to be able to, and some of it's going to be a financial question. Can you provide some type of financial support that's going to allow them to extend their independence? Because typically, when you talk about independence, it may require someone coming into the home or changing their home location, which again is going to create more angst amongst the person that you're trying to take that independence away from. What do you mean I have to sell my house? What do you mean I have to go into an assisted living environment? What do you mean I can't take care of my wife at home anymore? So I think that the most important thing is that you you try to find a mechanism by which you can support the right decision. It may not always be the option that they want to choose, but if you're going to say, well, you need to go to assisted living, well, it's up to the rest of the family to figure out how that's going to happen, because it may not financially be a reasonable thing. Or you may say, well, we can bring somebody into the home to watch mom for 4 hours a day, and you then ask yourself, is that enough? And then you ask, who's going to pay for this?
Well, those are hard conversations, and the one that I honestly had no idea about. I didn't even like cognitive impairment. I didn't even have any idea that it was a thing. Like I conceptually knew it, but like until it hit me in the face, and we couldn't really even have generation 1, generation 2 conversations with mom about it because she couldn't understand the conversation.
Yeah,
which is just. It's like you're speaking a foreign language. It's really humbling I would say the grace that God gave me the ability to navigate it, because we got into some kind of quasi-violent things that we had to navigate through, which I had no idea was even a thing.
But again, I would also say that most families should not be expected to have that ability to have those discussions. That's why you have professionals who are trained, if you trust them, to start that process, because they have the vocabulary to be able to talk to people about this, and hopefully the skill set to get into a room with them face to face and try to explain to them what's going on and why it's going on, rather than have a daughter or husband or son say, Mom, you've lost it.
Yeah. What does a physician and his or her staff need to be hearing more from the second generation?
Um,
How can we support our physicians and their staff?
so I guess tongue in cheek, when you're in your office and somebody's son calls and says, "Hey, I think Mom's got a memory problem," your first response is, "Oh, oh my gosh."
That's you as the doctor.
That's you as the doctor.
Okay.
Yes, because you realize that this is as you mentioned, HIPAA. This is a difficult situation that you have been thrust into, but you have to be able to take responsibility for that. So I think that the family members need to initiate the conversation, and it's probably best done um, outside of your loved one's presence, at least at the start. Because if you say, "Hey, Mom, I'm going to the doctor's office with you," and then you both walk into the room, and the doctor is there, or the nurse practitioner, you say, "She's got a problem," that is not going to go well.
Not a secret, but a
Yes,
private matter.
right.
I found that was, for me in that season, was a hard thing because of communication. Communicating to the doctors was difficult. A lot of times Mom would get, this is my bias, like third shift at the assisted living wasn't the high priority employees.
Yep.
And they would just send her to the emergency room if there was any problem. And she didn't really need to go there, but then I'd have to go talk to the doctors there. And I would write on the admission forms in bold letters, she has dementia, but they would look at the electronic document and they would never see that.
Right.
And so, like, one of the last times, and almost every single time, nobody knew that like the doctors when they came in didn't know she had dementia because it wasn't communicated to them. But and if that happens, you're a low priority. So you're in the emergency room forever, is my experience. And so the doctor came busting in, and we've been in there for quite a while. And he goes to Mom and he said, "Mrs. Tyner, what are we in here for today?" And she was probably late 70s. And she says, "I'm 6 months pregnant." And so I just smiled. I'm like, okay, what are we going to do here?
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole communication thing can get squirrely, I think.
But I think the other thing is that with a slow progression, people with dementia or problems like this learn how to compensate and hide things.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not always obvious that there is an issue or a problem.
One of our friends I really admire, I've seen how she's been walking through this with her husband. And she told me that it's very hard, but she told me that she is enjoying learning more about who her husband is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for Gen 2, that's an important thing. Or if you're a spouse, that's an important thing, just to be able to see what can I be learning right now, and picking up on cues of who my loved one is.
Right. Well, and I think you also need to acknowledge that there is an increase in vulnerability in these people, and to the point where you should accept that challenge and recognize that they're going to need more help. It's, it's kind of like when, if you take your child or your wife in for a surgical procedure and they're under anesthesia and, they've kind of they're out of it back in the recovery room. And you're sitting there thinking, if they need to get up, I need to help them. And so that vulnerability is also present in family members who have started down that path of dementia.
What would you say to the third generation, George? Like as maybe the kids that are in the house watching mom and dad take care of grandma and grandpa?
Hmm. Well, I think that they need to recognize that everyone has limited time, and if dad can't be at your baseball game because grandma fell and broke her hip, or grandpa started wandering again, that you have to be able or willing to accept those kinds of things.
Yeah, good.
I think again, I mean, you helped coach me through some situations that were out there for me, but like to begin thinking differently about the process. One of the ideas Connie helped me take into account is that this is a sacred time. It's going to be very stressful, but we're going to learn stuff through this that will change our life forever. And I had to because there's a lot of all hours of the day things that would go on, and I had to think through, okay, what am I going to do here in this situation without losing my mind? And so I learned a certain level of patience with it. I don't know what Caleb might remember from those days, but we did have a lot of interesting things go on. But I think there's just a sacred idea of the elderly and maybe even passing that to the third generation to let them know how sacred these people are.
Well, and it's interesting because I can recall being in the office, at midday and getting a call from my mom saying, well, the door was unlocked and your dad is out wandering and I have no idea where he is. And then you think, okay, I'm sitting here trying to see patients and things like that, and I'm the only sibling around. What are you going to do? But I think that the most important thing about that is that at some point, uh, your family member, your loved ones are going to die. And do you want to sit there a year later, 2 years later, 2 days later and say, if only I had had either more compassion, more dedication? No, you want to say, I stepped up to the plate.
Yeah.
No regrets.
No regrets. Yeah.
So I put down some wins, when to do things on my notes here, when it is an appropriate time to start the conversation about what we're talking about today. Is there?
Well, and that's a great point, but I think the time to start is before you start to see things happen. It's when your mom or dad or your spouse are 60 years old and you say, okay, let's figure out who you want to make those decisions for you, acknowledging that it can change. Um, but you want to at least start that conversation ahead of time so that you're not scrambling. Um, I don't know that there's a firm age or uh, physiologic or psychologic bellwether that you can determine. But I think the thing to recognize is you want to do that when everybody has their faculties, not when they're starting to slip.
Maybe just a catalyst you could use could be that maybe you're having a family dinner and another family is hitting this, and maybe talk about, hey, this is what this family is going through. Not us, but one day it's going to, I don't think anybody escapes it, right? It's going to.
No, that is correct.
Yeah. So when that's, you guys can choose when to start it. And the next thing would be, there's a point at which you have to push the conversation.
Right.
And when you think about that, when's the time? Is there a diagnosis, or when would you take it to the next level then?
Well, again, I think if you do have the observation that things have changed and you do have the opportunity for a healthcare provider to make the determination that there are some things that are starting to slip, I think that's when you become more firm about it.
And the final step that I was thinking about when is then there's even when you're more firm about it, there's a point at which you just have to be not even negotiate. It's I have to take charge at this point, and that's a really hard stage, I think.
Well, that's true. And one of the things that you can always, one of the trump cards you can use is things like liability. Um, if you are aware that your mom had just had 3 hit and run accidents and you chose not to do anything about it, but you knew about it, then you are responsible and liable, and not just financially, but if something would happen, it should weigh on you that you could have prevented it. So,
I've I don't know if I'd say I'm type A personality, but I'm willing to take the bull by the horns, and I would encourage people to put teams of professionals around them, not only the physicians, but there's plenty of other consultants that you can bring in. We brought in with mom a dementia specialist that helped us
mhm.
understand how to navigate through this, because I had to learn to communicate differently to mom. We couldn't have this kind of conversation because she can't understand certain things. Their short-term memory goes away, and so their ability to even understand the language gets different. So you can get consultants in there, and you can get a team around you, and we're happy to help you just kind of make some connections. But there are just decisions that need to be made, and you helped me with a difficult one this time last year, and so um, the uh, the idea that this ship is not correcting, it's not turning around, and um, there are I think physicians that just think that they're not necessarily looking at the long term. They're saying, what's this event and how do we fix this event? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So one example with my mom, I was in Washington, D.C., and she had some kind of mini stroke or something, and she wasn't able to communicate anymore. And by the time I got back, I was at the emergency room, and a cardiologist came in and was giving her a sales pitch on having heart surgery. And I asked if we could go out in the hall and say, we are not doing heart surgery. Like where this thing is going downhill, and that's not going to be productive. And so then last year, my uncle had taken a fall, and there was a number of surgeries people were wanting to do. And I was out of town, and I was trying to act on his behalf. And I didn't know what to do. Like, nobody was directing me longer term. They were just saying, here's the decision short term you need to make. And how would somebody shift from that short term decision to think, how does this fit in the long term?
Whenever I have these discussions, I use the 2 Qs: quality of life and quantity of life. Um, because as you implied, a doctor can look there and say, well, we need to put a pacemaker in this person, or we need to do surgery on this person. And uh, you have to reflect on what their recent quality of life was and what the projected quality of life will be, and not just in quantity of days, because doctors can do that all the time. If we put a pacemaker in, that's going to keep the uh, heart going, and my job is done. But it's not necessarily the right thing to do. And you should be able to project uh, what things are going to look like, you know, a week, a month, 6 months down the road. If your mentation is poor, if I always use the TV test. If you turn the TV on in the room and they don't know the TV's on, they failed the TV test. And so then you say, okay, if we are aggressive with this person, are we improving their quality of life if we are able to send them to therapy and keep them around for another 3, 6 months? The answer is probably no. It becomes a decision about how you impact their quality. And it's interesting you put up this chart about the
I'll show
the
this again.
days. Um, when I was in primary care practice, my observation was that 85 is about the time when people kind of wake up every morning and say, okay, God, you know, what purpose do I have for today? And they have a hard time struggling with that. They'll say, all of my friends are gone. I don't enjoy the day. I don't like where I'm living. And with those people, then you say, okay, uh, if something semi catastrophic happens, are we really doing them a favor by making them wake up every day?
That helped when I called you last January. That helped. I went to I think my daughter Casey and I went to visit my uncle, and he had a kind of a living room area, then a bedroom area. And when we came into the entrance in the living room, he didn't know we were in there. He was hard of hearing, and we heard him praying out loud, "Why am I still here?"
Mm-hmm.
We turned around and left because I thought this is kind of an intimate moment of his, but it helped me in the decision grid because I knew just what you were saying. That's what he was asking. Let me show. Oh, I'm showing this. You also helped me one day. One day I was making one of those middle of the night runs, and I'm like, I was frustrated, and I asked you, I don't even know what to do. Like, I'm going to be in the emergency room. I don't know why we're there. And I think I was just whining to you what I was doing. And I wonder with this chart if it doesn't say the same thing that you said to me to relax is what I heard, but you said, I wonder if medical technology hasn't made people live too long. And that's really all I needed to hear. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, this mom is here, but she's not really here. And I can get angry. That doesn't serve any point. But from 1950 to 2015, it shows that peak time. It went from 77 to 87. And I wonder if a lot of that's just medical technology has kept the bodies ticking. And it goes back to that um, quote that's attributed to Mark Twain is that maybe people aren't really living as much anymore.
Well, and, you know, my friends and I have conversations when we see the headlines where a 106-year-old was still living at home and passed away. And, you know, my first thought, as most of my friends are, I wouldn't want to live to be 106.
That's 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 one of my biblical jokes. I think Methuselah lived to 969, and my question is, at what age did he wake up and said, "Really, another day"?
Well, it's interesting because if you start reading Genesis from the beginning, you start to notice that, people, they kind of subtly hint that something is happening because, yeah, somebody died at 900. Then all of a sudden, she was 600 when she passed away. And then pretty soon it was 130. So I think there's some intent from God uh, to make that shift. And this change in the graph is probably not from God, but probably from science.
So, George, if you were somewhere between 60 and 106 years old, what's the one thing that you could do today to make a difference for yourself, for your future?
Um, well, I'm a pretty vigorous exerciser, and if that went away, I think I would probably not be very happy. So the things that I would like to do would be to continue to exercise. Um, I think that I would like to strengthen my faith. I'm always amazed at when I go to church, you see, and it's mostly women because that's who's living longer. You think, look at this person who's across the aisle from me, who is probably in her early 90s, and she's in here learning every Sunday about things that, she's been doing this for 9 or 10 decades now. And so you have to be excited that there is still a lot you can learn. And that's, I think, to be able to continue to learn, whether it's faith or hobbies or whatever, is the thing that I would look most forward to.
Yeah, that's a great way to encourage independence.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot we could have conversations. Maybe you could join us again one day and talk about maybe a couple other specific areas and maybe and help us think through some consultants. But I'm really grateful for your time today.
Okay.
George is, I put him in the top shelf kind of friends, the high quality kind of people. It's just an honor to get time with you and to allow you to share some wisdom with our friends.
That just goes to show you Keith ought to do a better job of choosing his friends.
Doug, let's do this again. You guys have a great weekend and we'll see you real soon.